Let's talk about innovation, because everybody wants to talk about innovation. Everybody thinks that they're innovative, and everybody, most everybody, has the wrong idea about innovation. They think of innovation as all of a sudden this big leap in a concept or functionality that arises out of the ether because somebody is creative or innovative. And I'm here to tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. Innovation, especially in technology, is extremely, extremely similar to biological evolution. Okay? And what does that mean? That means that it's created on top of standards. And the moment that you have a standard that is stable, you can then execute a mutation for which there are two possibilities. That mutation is going to be successful and therefore become part of the standard, or that mutation is going to be unsuccessful and disappear altogether, right? So when you look at all of the innovation that has taken place since you were born, or that you are aware of, what you see is the constant buildup of layers of standardization that enable that innovation to flourish. Okay? And I'm going to give you a few anecdotes that reflect that. Now, there's one more thing I should have mentioned up front, and that is this. Show of hands, and you got to participate, okay? Show of hands. How many of you think that you will actually have an effect on the rest of my career? None, right? Okay. So whatever I tell you, it's not about trying to impress you. It's not about bragging. It's about talking about my experience and as it relates to potentially your aspirations or your dreams, okay? Within that context, okay, that's what I'm going to relay these anecdotes about. So let me talk about innovation in anecdotes. I got a job in a company called General Health Incorporated, and they had, and I'm going to talk very fast, by the way. I'm going to accelerate as we go through. And they had this fantastic concept. They had this fantastic concept that they could ask you a bunch of questions. They could measure your blood values. They could measure your blood pressure. And by that, estimate not only what your health age is, but also what your attainable health age is. Now, what do I mean by that? You all know that you are a certain age. Let's say me, 62. But because of my family history and because of the way I've lived my life expectancy is actually higher than most people who are 62. So my health age is more like a 55-year-old rather than a 62-year-old, right? So they came up with this concept, very, very successful, and now being used on a regular basis by all of the insurance companies. So they have this paper questionnaire that you'd mark with a little, the pencil in the little ball, right? And people would fill these out, send them in to this central processing via mail. It was 1984, by the way, via mail. And it would be processed by a mainframe machine. And then a report would be produced in this large printer and send it back to the individuals. Altogether, this process would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 weeks, okay? And it would cost a lot of money. So I started working there, and I was programming in a language called Fortran. How many of you have heard of it? Yeah. All right, okay, Fortran, right? And all of a sudden it hit me. Microcomputers had just come out. Why don't we automate this entire thing, call the mainframe with a modem, get the results initialized, sent back to a local printer, reducing the time frame for processing to 5 minutes instead of 3 weeks, eliminating all of the expense of mailing, scanning, printing, and sending back, which was in the $13 range. I went to my boss, who was the director of MIT, those are the people that used to be called the CIOs, and told him, I think that this is what we should do. And he looked at me and said, it's too risky, Andre. We don't know exactly how many people out there have microcomputers. We don't know if people are capable of navigating an application like this. And frankly, in the modem, there might be loss of transmission, and then we have a problem. I don't think this is a good idea. I thought it was a good idea. So I went to the CEO, and said, hey, James, he was a Harvard-trained surgeon. They all think they're God. I said, James, I think that we should change our business model to do this. And he looked at me, his eyes went wide open, and said, that would be brilliant, Andre. We could save millions of dollars. The profit margin for this organization would go through the roof, and the service to the clients would be much better. They wouldn't have to wait for 3 weeks to find out what their health age is. And said, how long would it take to do this? And I told him, about 2 weeks. He said, that's impossible. He said, no, let me try. And so for the next 2 weeks, we furiously ran some basic code and created a program. And 2 weeks later, we demonstrated it to him. 6 months later, I was the manager of information systems, right? I was 24 years old, and I was in charge of the whole thing, right? Now, why did this happen? Because at 24, I had nothing to lose. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have a marriage. I didn't have kids. I didn't have school loans. Nothing. So what happened? I decided to take a change, to take a risk, and did it, right? Now, was that innovation? You don't know? Was that a complete change in the business plan of that company? That was innovation. Was it built on what? On the fact that there was a new standard with a computer, the microcomputers from IBM at the time, that operated on an operating system called BASIC, that could transmit over a modem to a mainframe, receive back from that modem, and print on a local printer. At the time, they were Epsons, line matrix, right? And there it was. Was that innovation? Of course it is. Was it built on standards? Yes, evolving standards, right? So innovation is constantly evolving because the standards are constantly evolving. And if you build on those, you're always going to have a large marketplace that will use those standards. What is the biggest thing that happened to microcomputers, and one might argue with the computer world, over the last 50 years? Okay? Everything that happened before that and everything that has happened since then, because that's how you created that standardization. When you look at your cell phone, you are dealing with standardizations that started in the age of mainframes in the late 1950s, right? And all of those have created this environment where you can deal with this. So what's the difference with innovators? They're willing to take risks. They look at the entire picture and they take risks. And let me give you an example of how easy you can lose that innovation little nerve. 1994, 96, 98. 1998, I'm at PBS, I'm the CIO. And we were running the third largest web.org in the world. Okay, literally billions of hits a month. And this young guy comes to me, 22, 23, just out of college. And he said, Mr. Mendes, to which I replied, call me Andre. And he said, we are running all of this on Sun Microsystems architecture. How many of you have heard of Sun Microsystems? One or two. Okay, great. It was the most powerful brand when the internet exploded upon the world. Okay? And we are running Sun Solaris. It's costing us $400,000 a month to do this. I can do the same thing that you're doing in these powerful enterprise servers that cost $250,000 a piece on PC servers that cost $3,000 a piece running Linux. What do you think my answer to him was? That's too dangerous. It's too risky. What happens if we have a problem in the middle of the night? Who am I going to call? Because today, if you have a problem with Linux, you call Red Hat, or you call Ubuntu, you call whomever, and you get an answer. Back then, it was truly open source. There was not a company behind it. It was just a bunch of individuals all over the world that were contributing to something. So I said, no, I can't do it. We can't do it, sorry. I went home that night, and I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat. Why is that? Because I had seen that movie of somebody young coming to you in an established position and saying, I think that this is something we could do. And what happened? When I did that, I became the director of information systems. And now as a CIO, I was refusing that from a 22-year-old. What was going to happen? It would be a year, it would be 2 years, it would be 3 years. He would be the CIO. And I'd be out of a job because I didn't have an innovative bone in my body, right? So I went back and talked to him and said, hey, guess what? We're going to try it. I'm going to give you $10,000. You're going to buy 3 servers. You're going to buy, get your Linux implementation started. And if you know web pages, if it runs on Unix, it runs on Linux, right? Same thing, same principles, basically, right? And we're going to give it a try. And guess what happened? It worked. And 6 months later, we called Sun Microsystems and said, we're done with your licenses. We're no longer using Sun or Solaris or any of all of the other software. And we started saving $400,000 a month. That was innovation on his part. But my fear, because now I had a career, I had a mortgage, I had kids, I had loans, I had car loans, was preventing me from moving forward. That was the last time in my career that I was afraid of innovation. That was the last time in my career where I refused to hear from somebody much younger than me without as much experience, something that could be revolutionary, right? And so you're going to be tempted, as you get more comfortable, to look at risks and avoid them. And you will lose your innovation gene. You'll become just somebody who could be a great coder, a great administrator, a great project manager, but you will never be an innovator unless you keep that gene of saying, I can take calculated risks. Okay, so innovation, risks, standardization, this is all part of this big picture, okay, where people like you are going to make the world move forward, okay? The next set of innovations, it will not likely be driven by people in my age group, right? It will be driven by people in your age group. Now, there's a few of us that still want to keep up and keep going, okay? But the numbers are overwhelming because the more comfortable we get, the less innovative we are. Now, this is not a one-off situation. This happens all the time. People spring up from companies and start new companies that dramatically revolutionize the world, right? And they all were successful, and they could have just stayed, laid down and said, I'm making $3 million a year. I have a yacht, I have this, I have that, I have that. I don't need to take any risks. And then innovation stops, right? Let me give you another example. I went from PBS, that experience, to a startup company with basically no funding, nothing. But it was a startup company that was working with the human genome in 2001. And we were able to put together a scientific advisory board of some of the best people in the world. Long story short, when we were going to get a second round of financing, September 11th happened, and we couldn't get a second round of financing. So the company went bankrupt. So I had gone from having a very nice job at PBS as CIO to being unemployed, literally in 5 months. Okay, so now what? Well, PBS brought me back because they liked me and they liked the innovation, but they put me in charge of a different portfolio. Not only was I in charge of information technology, I was also now in charge of broadcast technology, television, radio. Why is that important? Because that was during the time when the United States was making its migration to digital television. And digital television, it's all about ones and zeros. It's computers, it's images, it's the things that you are so familiar with on your phone, right? But at that time, they didn't exist. There was no streaming. None of that existed. Television was, sent to a local TV station, sent over the air or sometimes by cable, and you would hook up the TV either to an antenna or to cable, and you could watch it, right? So we introduced a concept at PBS that said we're going to change the entire paradigm of how television and radio are consumed. We're going to leverage the internet and the ubiquity of IP services in order to distribute content. And you're going to leverage the latest and greatest codecs the engines that encode a signal so it is much smaller and therefore it can be transmitted very efficiently, to do that. And what happened? Over the next 4 years, we developed the entire basis for digital television distribution in the entire world, with a team of people that were mostly interested in keeping their job and who detested innovation because they had been doing the same thing for the past 35 years. And they were very comfortable. They were the leaders in the industry. When you look at some of the features that you find in television and streaming today, like, for example, closed captioning. You know what closed captioning is, right? That was invented at PBS by that team of engineers. They wanted nothing to do with this transformation, okay? So badly that the unions at PBS slashed my tires twice. All 4 tires slashed, because they thought that when we did this transition, they were all going to lose their jobs. We're going to automate everything. Everything is going to be robotics, and we're going to lose our jobs. So they slashed my tires twice. Could have quit at that time. We kept going. We kept going because we had a dream, right? And that dream was bringing IT to broadcasting and dramatically changing it. All of that work is the beginning of Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Paramount. Everything started from that dream. Okay? Why? Because we were able to convince people that were afraid for their jobs that it's actually going to be better for them. We were enabled to convince them that a dream that we had for digitization was going to come true. And so it did. Now, here's the funny thing. All of the broadcast technologists and the technicians, they were afraid they were going to lose their jobs. They were making 90 grand a year, which in 2004 was not a bad salary. Ended up, because they were in the forefront of this technology, being hired by the local TV stations to be the transformers of their migration to digital television. And all of a sudden, these technicians who slashed my tires and were afraid of losing their job at $90,000 were making $250,000 a year. Why? Because they were on the crescent of that wave of digitalization when everybody else was behind. So they had knowledge that nobody knew anything about. Okay? So what is innovation? Innovation is risk-taking and building upon standards with a new mutation that takes advantage of a new technology that might appear nowhere related to what you're doing, but nevertheless can be incorporated. And the same pattern exists again and again and again and again. It'll be repeated ad nauseum, ad infinitum, right? Because you think about biological evolution. Remember I told you that they were related? And when you think about biological evolution, what you have is the appearance of a first unicellular organism. And what is that unicellular organism has in common with us? Homo sapiens sapiens. We're the top of the chain, right? What does it have in common with us? Well, there's a cell. How many of you have taken a biology class? Okay, if you haven't, take one. Do it as an elective. It'll be a great lesson. So you have a nucleus. You have a cell. You have a nucleus, and you have mitochondria, right? And all of the organelles inside the cell. How are you built? By 1 trillion cells that have a nucleus and a mitochondria and other organelles. The basic principles of mitochondrial functioning have not changed in 2 billion years. But here you are listening to a lecture, you're processing complex environments, and not once have you thought about your mitochondria, right? But they're there doing the work for you so that you can consume this content, you can live, you can breathe, you can eat, right? Standards, right? So it's important to understand that concept as you go into the next layer of evolution of technology. 98% of the technologies that you will use today in your career did not exist 30 years ago. They were built upon the others, right? And 5 years from now, if you learn nothing but what you learned in this course, you will be technologically obsolete. okay? Because the speed of development and the speed of innovation is double exponential. And so what used to progress at this speed, went to progressing at this speed, is now progressing at this speed. And if you stop and you're satisfied because you think you're going fast enough, from a career standpoint, you're going to be in trouble, right? Artificial intelligence, right? The way it's being built, the way that's being portrayed. Everybody talking about it as a huge leap, right? A huge leap. GPT all of a sudden came across, and everybody was just like, oh, this came out of nowhere. Of course not. We've been doing artificial intelligence for 30 years, right? We've been building the models for 30 years. The reason why all of a sudden it exploded into our consciousness is because you have the entire ecosystem, including all the search engines, all the distribution, the computational power that can take this to the next level. Then it's just a matter of putting those resources together and moving to the next level, right? Now, when we think about breaking the next barrier, which is when artificial intelligence stops being just about machine learning and starts being about machine thinking, okay? Everybody will say, oh, this is evolution. This is a deviation from everything else. No, it's built on exactly the same principles. Built on exactly the same principles. The engines have just become more sophisticated, okay? And so I can tell you that throughout my career, I've had one example after another of coming into an environment from the outside, looking at it, applying what I know about the industry at large, the constant knowledge that I try to acquire on a daily basis, right? So for my new job, I live in Sherman. The job is in Fort Worth, 90 minutes driving every morning and every night, okay? What do? I listen to the latest and greatest books on science and technology and anthropology and discovery and genetics and biology. Why? Because I am deadly afraid of becoming irrelevant, right? And so when you look at that as a life principle, you start understanding the dynamics. And you might think, oh my God, that's exhausting. It's not. It's incredibly invigorating, but requires courage. I'll tell you this, and this is where I'm going to take a risk here, okay? But you guys got to be with me. I came from a culture that by and large was risk averse. And the funny thing was, it was a culture that used to be enormously risk-taking. You know, the 1500s, Portuguese ships were all over the world, discovering the world, right? I see many of you are from Southeast Asia, right? Okay, Goa, Damão, Dio, those were Portuguese environments, right? Part of my family is from Goa. And then all of a sudden, that country became so rich that it became comfortable. And the moment it became comfortable, it lost that spirit, right? And so my entire growth process until I left my country was about accommodation. It was about trying to figure out how I could get comfortable and then go to the beach the rest of the time, right? It didn't appeal to me. Now, you come from a culture that until very recently didn't embrace change. Most of you, not all of you, right? Didn't embrace change wholeheartedly. But then all of a sudden this technology, explosion occurred, and all of a sudden it's a country that has an enormous amount of risk takers. Some of the best technologists I know in the United States are first generation Indians and Pakistanis and Yemenis and Chinese and now Portuguese, right? So you have to always understand that your culture could be one of the biggest impediments, regardless of what it is. Because nowadays, a lot of the Americans have the exact same culture. A culture of, I'm all right, I'm comfortable, I'm okay, I don't need much more. People are taking care of me. That is going to be one of your biggest risks, especially as you grow older, especially as you grow more established, especially as you grow more comfortable. It's real easy to make $150,000 a year and think that you got it and that you don't need to do anything else. The world will continue to change on you. Innovation will never stop. It's asymptotic. If you know anything about mathematics and derivatives and calculus, right? It's asymptotic. And unless you're constantly moving forward, you're falling behind, okay? Now, this is where personal responsibility comes in, because it's easy to be comfortable. It's easy to be an also-ran. It's easy to be part of an enormous mass of people that do little to nothing to contribute to the betterment of humankind. And you see it every day. Okay? So at which point do you take it upon yourself to say, I am going to be a contributor to humankind? And it could be for religious motives. It could be for deeply personal beliefs, deep personal beliefs. It could be out of a desire for fame, okay? As long as you have that drive to contribute to the betterment of mankind and humankind and womankind, of course, then you're going to be in a better place. Now, you're in a school that is managed by a dean that came to this country, to England, actually, if I may say, with $17, 17 pounds in your pocket, 10 pounds in his pocket. Here he is. You're listening from somebody who came to this country with $300. I had a lot more money than him, which means his experience is that much more valuable. Okay, and I've been the CIO at Department of Commerce. I don't know if I'll ever get a bigger position, but I was, right? So what did it take? Is there anything special about me? No, it's not. But it's that understanding that I am what I accomplish on the betterment of humankind. Okay? And it's never driven by interests, personal interests of fame or fortune. I'm actually not a rich man. Taken down a lot of jobs that I could have made a lot more money. But I've always worked for causes. Like I worked 3 years for Special Olympics, right? You familiar with Special Olympics? Yeah? Yeah? Come on. Okay. Okay. If you're not familiar, Special Olympics is the organization that caters to people with intellectual disabilities, like Down syndrome, right? When I joined, they had 1.7 million athletes in the world. 3 years later, when I left, they had 4 million athletes in the world. Why? Because we completely redid what was a mom and pop shop of information technology and created a 100% cloud-based environment for them that was worldwide in 2009. People weren't even talking about the cloud. Some of you were still riding a bicycle with wheels in the back, right? There was no cloud then. We did it, right? I took a $90,000 pay cut to go to work for them. I'm not telling you that so you can be impressed by me. Okay, we've already decided that that's not part of the equation. But it's the understanding that when you dedicate your life to the service of one of the most underserved people in the world, that you can accomplish great things with almost nothing, dramatically improve your spiritual life, your own recognizance of what that means, be it religious or atheist or anything in between, while you're contributing to humankind. And that's where your personal responsibility comes in. Because you all know that sitting here in this classroom, you have a better life than 99.8% of the people in the world, right? So what are you going to do with it? How are you going to change the world? How are you going to take the risks necessary for you to be an innovator that even might become famous because you've changed the world for an entire class of people, for entire humankind? Because the discoveries are going to come fast and furious. Over the next 10 years, genetics, nanotechnology are going to dramatically change what it means to be a human being. Okay? Dramatically. Who of you amongst you have heard of a technology called CRISPR? None? Okay, homework. CRISPR doesn't have an I. Just like CRISPR, like a lettuce, okay, a crisper lettuce, or a crispier chicken sandwich without the I. Go Google CRISPR, but I'll give you a hint of what it is. CRISPR is word processing for DNA. It allows you to go in with an enormous amount of precision, remove a piece of DNA genetic code that is either malfunctioning or can be improved, and replaces it with a new piece of code that either solves the problem or creates an improvement in the functioning of a human being. Now, you might think, okay, how does that manifest itself? Well, there was a disease called Fanconi's anemia that mostly occurred in children. Well, there's a reason why it mostly occurred in children, because any child born with Fanconi's anemia would not make their third birthday, period. But it was dependent on a single gene. And so through gene editing techniques, the surgeons were able to, if a family had that gene in their family, they could create an in vitro fertilization, a fertilized egg. They could do a pre-implantation surgery on that egg, remove that gene, replace it with a healthy gene, and then implant it in the mother, in the uterus, so it would grow at a normal baby. Fanconi's anemia in Western civilization has basically almost disappeared, right? Now they have found that there is an association between 3 sets of genes and Parkinson's disease. Do you know anybody with Parkinson's? No? Okay. Degenerative chronic disease that eventually basically shuts down all your systems. You start trembling, then you lose control of your muscles, then you can't walk, and then you die. Okay? Same thing with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, right? Or Lou Gehrig's disease, as it's called. The same thing with most cancers who have a genetic base to it, right? So over the next 10 years, what you're going to see is this confluence of technologies, which is what it always happens, because technology is the greatest enabler, right, to solve problems of humankind. Some people don't like genetic modified organisms, right? But here's the reality. Without genetic modified organisms, you're going to have a really tough time feeding 7.7 billion people. Okay, but with genetically modified organisms, you probably can feed 12 billion, despite what all the things that people tell you, right? So, what kind of impact are you going to have on mankind? How are you going to leverage what you bring to the table to make a meaningful contribution? And that's a decision that you have to make on a daily basis, a decision that will make you uncomfortable at times, because rather than just resting or playing video games or doing whatever, you're going to learn. You're going to learn how to leverage. You're going to learn how to intermix different industries, different scientific principles, different modalities, different disciplines into a brave new world that will radically change the way you grow up, the way your children will grow up, and your grandchildren will grow up. So you, every one of you, has that opportunity. And you can choose to take advantage of it or not. And I will tell you right now, a lot of people will not. Okay? That's a decision you got to make. But the opportunity is there, especially in this country. Especially in this country, where you can achieve anything as long as you decide that you're going to. Right? And I don't care who you are, what background you came from. Okay, there's no other country where people can come from nothing and become the richest man in the world. Do you know what Jeff Bezos' parents did? You know Jeff Bezos? Amazon, right? At one time, the richest man in the world. Do you know what his parents did? His mother was a stay-at-home mother. His father owned a bicycle repair shop. Now you tell me, of any of the countries that you come from, in which country is that individual going to be the richest man in the world? There's only one. It's right here. I consider myself enormously lucky the moment I landed in this country on July 31st, 1979, more than 44 years ago. and I haven't stopped running since. It is your challenge to never stop running. Because guess what? It's not a dress rehearsal, right? You grow up, you work, you have a family, you have kids, and then you start aging, at least for the time being. That might change in the future, okay? So there's not a dress rehearsal. So you have got to leverage that personal responsibility to do the most you can on behalf of humankind.
So you have experience with Plovita Corporation?
Plovita Corporation, yeah.
So where you dealt with layoffs. Can you speak more about how you dealt with them? And
literally the worst day of my life. Well, there's others from a personal standpoint. When my father died, that still remains unassailed. So, first round of financing, we put together a fantastic scientific advisory board, including a gentleman by the name of Lee Hood. Google him, Lee Hood. He was the inventor of the DNA sequencer. Okay, we raised $5 million on nothing, not a project, not a process, not a product, just on the promise that this scientific board that we had assembled was going to generate amazing stuff. And we started working on it, and things were going really well. And then September 11th happened. And all of the venture capitalists stopped investing on any companies at all. So we went from being a very promising startup to running out of money. So I had to let go 62 people in one day. Okay? And I was the only employee left. Now, I mean, you might think, oh, how convenient, Andre. Okay? But my salary was reduced to $100 a week. And I had to liquidate the company. And I was the only one that had experience with the legal aspects of liquidating a company. To this day, and in my entire career, I fired, those were layoffs. I fired 6 people. 6. In 43 years, that's not bad. Okay? And all of them were absolutely and resolutely intent on being fired by virtue of their inaction or their malicious action, right? I can tell you that there's not a single one time that happened where I didn't fall ill and had to go to the bathroom. You're eating pizza, so I won't go any further, because it's not something that you ever want to do. If you ever feel comfortable firing people, quit, because you have become a lousy manager. Even if those people are bad and deserve to be fired. Because whether they realize it or not, you're changing their life, not necessarily for the better. Okay? And that should always be a concern. Because you have to be conscientious about both the things that you can do that are well impacting on other people, and the things that sometimes you have to do that will have a negative impact on other people. That is part of being conscientious, okay, and realizing the role that you play as a manager and as a leader in any organization. Okay?
In the tech industry.
Sorry.
What's your take on the current layoffs that are happening in the tech industry right now?
What's
your take on?
Oh, my take, huh? Okay, you know what? Everything is different and nothing is different. Okay, people have always complained about how fast things are and how fast they're moving, but that's always the case. It has always been the case. Do you know how long it took for a unicellular organism to become a multicellular organism? Hundreds of millions of years. You know how long it took for all of the entire process to generate a human being? 1.8 billion years, right? Do you know how long it took for the first computer really to be invented? Another 800,000 years. Do you know that the latest supercomputer that was launched can do 1.2 quintillion operations per second? You know how long that took? 74 years. Next year, it will be 7 quintillion. The year after that will be 10 quintillion. So things are always moving. So what's my take? My take is that things are going to continue to move faster and faster and faster. They're going to change everything about what we know as being a human being, and that you need to adapt in order to thrive. I never say survive, because I don't want anybody to just survive. I want them to thrive, right? If you think about it, the poorest people, let's just take the United States. The poorest people in the United States have a better standard of living than King Louis XV in France in the Middle Ages. Right? They didn't have bathrooms. Their food was horrible. Dysentery was running rampant. The longevity expectation was somewhere in the 38 to 40 years old. Today, you can be very poor and live until you're 90, right? You have air conditioning. You have a cell phone. You have a car. You have TV. None of that was part of the equation, right? Your grandparents could not possibly imagine the life that you live. You cannot possibly imagine the life that your grandchildren will live, right? And it will just continue to go that way. So my take, keep learning. Just keep learning. Don't be afraid. Keep learning, and you'll do great.
Thank you so much for your question. Do you have a question now? Okay, all right.
No, because the people online.
So adding to her question, you said keep learning. So in spite of many people are, getting updated with the latest technologies, as part of these companies' organization restructure, they are doing layoffs. So you mentioned layoffs happened because you were out of funds. Like the revenue of the company was very low and
there's no money.
There's no money. So you were not able to, pay people. But nowadays, there are many layoffs that are happening and companies are still, projecting good revenues of their companies. So in spite of people learning, still they're doing layoffs because,
Sure.
To increase their revenue.
Sure.
Pay people less and then get more work done with them.
So you're getting to the crux. You're getting to the crux of the economic nature of society, right? And the question is, should a company maintain people that hold it back from its objectives, right? Because let me tell you what happens. A company, unless it constantly adapts to the environment, is an ephemeral thing. It can be here and it can be not here. You know how long that takes to happen? Sometimes a couple of years. 1999, Sun Microsystems was the pinnacle of the electronics industry. Scott McNealy selling servers for $10 million. And Scott McNealy, when asked the question by yours truly at a Gartner conference in Florida, and I asked him, do you think the future of technology is software or hardware? He was a hardware vendor. So he said, oh, it's hardware without a shadow of a doubt. And he kept pursuing that. Hardware is abstraction. Everybody can produce that with hardware. You have CPUs from Intel, you have CPUs from NVIDIA. You can put them together with any material that you want from China, from anywhere else, and you got a computer. Software is where it's at. Software, it's where it's at. Up here. This is the most precious part of your equation, right? So companies have to do things in order to keep moving forward with profit margins. Now, a company is designed to make money. It's not an altruistic organization. It's not Special Olympics, right? Now, it could have altruistic motives as well, all right? But primarily is to make money, right? And so we will do whatever is necessary to do that. But throughout the history of mankind, especially in this country, right? Getting a job, if you have the right skills and really want to do it, has never been a major problem. Temporarily, yes, but in the long run, not at all. Not at all. I was telling your colleague, do you know how many days I've been unemployed in this country? I've been here 44 years and 8 months. One day. The day that I got here. But I was washing dishes the next day. Right? So, if I got laid off today, what do you think I would do? And I could go home and just say, hey, you know what, Andre, it's all right. You're getting your retirement from the federal government. Your savings will last you, it'll be okay. If I had to wash dishes, I would wash dishes, but I would not be out of work. I can guarantee you that. Okay, so always moving forward. Do not be detained by your fears.
And we have a follow-up question from the virtual audience related to your two questions. So thank you so much for your questions.
No, the pressure is on you now.
Okay, so do you think that the layoffs have something to do with the de-dollarization resulting in cost cuts? If yes, what's the best way to tackle this situation?
And now we go to macroeconomics and geopolitics. This is where I'm going to get into huge trouble. Layoffs in technology are almost unavoidable. They're cyclical in nature. They're almost unavoidable. Now, do I think that an environment, and if I offend your political considerations, I'm terribly sorry. But I'm not here to make you happy. But I'm hopefully here to make you a little more understanding of the world. Economic growth is driven by a number of factors. And one of the most important ones when it comes to the lower portions of the economy are interest rates. Because when interest rates reach a certain level, investment decreases dramatically, absolutely dramatically, right? And so we are now in a situation where the interest rates have put a severe hindrance to the economy, but not at the entire macro level, because there's so much money in the economy that economic growth is still possible. But for the small organizations, that has become extremely difficult because you cannot make capital investments. For young people that want to buy a house, it has become almost impossible because when the prices are what they are, especially in this area, you know, and the interest rates are at 7 or 8%, it becomes impossible. It's not sustainable, right? And so, yeah, no, we got to always be looking at an economic environment in which growth is enabled, because growth is desirable. It's the way that we have gotten rid of poverty across almost the entire world, okay? And it's not ruthless, okay? And that's the part where it also is very related to biological, evolution, right? Let me ask you a question. You've heard of Cro-Magnon, Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo afarensis? Those are all of the generations until we came Homo sapiens sapiens. You and me truly, right? Has anybody ever felt sorry about Australopithecus? No. Somebody invented a better trap and they died off. Now that might seem callous to you, okay? But, and here's where I'm really going to get in trouble, okay? Historically, the entire universe has been ruthless. The empathy that we feel for human beings is quite unique. It's quite unique in the history of the entire universe, right? And so the question becomes, is it desirable? Oh, I think so. I think so. But can you take it into an extreme where it becomes detrimental, right? Because if it becomes detrimental, then the next evolution will come and surely destroy us. And let me give you an example that you might be able to relate to, and that again will be controversial, but it's okay, right? Who thinks that the minimum wage should be $50 an hour? Who thinks it should be $35 an hour? Who thinks it should be $20 an hour? Okay. She's going to get mad at me. So here's what happens with a minimum wage of $20 an hour for a restaurant. Let's say McDonald's. If you pay $20 an hour to an employee for 8 hours a day, and you need, let's say, 10 employees to run your restaurant, right? And then you have to put on top of that the 35% of benefits that the government makes you pay. You're not paying $20 an hour. Okay, what you're paying is $27 an hour, right? And so 27 times 8 hours, times 10 people, times 365 days. You make those calculations, but I tell you it's going to be about $800,000. Now let's say that you have 41,000 restaurants in the world, and you multiply that, and you're going to get about $32.8 billion. Now let me tell you that you can install a system in a restaurant that will make the restaurant totally and completely automatic, without a single person, with just robots and software. How long are you going to be before, instead of spending $32.8 billion here in salaries, I'm going to spend $16.8 billion here in investment in software and hardware to completely automate every single restaurant? And the answer is 5 years. Because the moment that you could depreciate a capital investment over 3 years at a cost lower than what it costs you to run the restaurant with the human beings, those jobs are gone. Okay, so so this is a balance that has to be kept in, right? And the mistake that people make, and I washed dishes, I waited tables, I bartended, I was a maitre d', any job you can think of, right? The moment that you become more expensive than the profit margin of the restaurant or any other organization, you become totally dispensable. And if it's through automation, it's through automation. If it's through closing the restaurant down, it's through closing the restaurant down. Okay, but you cannot have an imbalance, right? Also, when was I doing those things? When I was 18, 19, 20. I wasn't doing them to feed a family. Okay, and so the concept that those are career positions is almost anathema to the history of the industry, right? Now, there are cases where people work at McDonald's because they can't do anything else. That's okay, right? But the concept that you can raise a family on that salary has never been real, and in all likelihood will never be real. So you got to be cognizant of that, because economically, the moment that you give people and our organizations an incentive to completely automate a process is the moment that's going to happen. And then we're done? Oh, okay. Okay. So these are complicated questions now. Next thing, somebody's going to ask me about geopolitics. It's like I'm in trouble then.
So, André, thank you for the talk. It was fantastic. Just on this particular point, I think the society at the moment also has gone a little bit more corrupt in terms of few people getting obscene amounts. And I think that kind of creates this problem that it's not just how what I'm earning, but is that actually makes sense? So I think that's one thing. Sun Microsystems. Nobody here seems to know what Sun Microsystem is. Java came from that. That's what Sun Microsystem is. Okay, André, back to you.
Yeah. Java came from that, and it became the only part of the company that was valuable.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, André, I have one question for you. I think that will be beneficial for here for everybody. Tell me a little bit about your understanding or your perspective on networking. In your
human networking.
How did it help you? Did you make those networks? Because here, a lot of times when I meet one-on-one, and yes, there are a lot of students here from India, and I ask them very pointed question, that is, so how many non-Indian friends you have? And very rarely I get an answer that is that, okay, you are in US. You should be making friends because that networking in different arenas would help you. I would like to hear your perspective. Thank you.
So, more than half of the jobs that I have ever gotten were because of people I knew at a previous job. More than half, okay? And the reason why I'm here is because of networking, right? And so, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, I'm in so much trouble. It's crazy. If all you do is deal with people that are just like you, and by that I mean in general terms, right? And if you speak your native language with them, and all you're exposed to is those customs and their culture, there's an enormous benefit to that. I love the diasporas, but there's an enormous price to pay. Enormous price to pay. Okay, and you have to be cognizant of both elements. So I have except for my sister, I don't have a single Portuguese friend in the United States. Not a single one. Didn't chase them out. Didn't want to know them. I mean, it's like it doesn't matter. Right? I'm still bilingual, right? And I speak Portuguese with all of my family. But otherwise, other than that, I speak French with my French friends, Spanish with my Spanish friends, Italian with my Italian friends, English with my English friends, right? And so that acculturation that needs to take place is absolutely essential. Now, do you need to keep your costumes and culture and everything? Of course, those are extremely important. There's still things that I do that are inherently Portuguese 44 years later. But if you become involved in an environment that only contains people that look and sound and speak and think like you, you're building those walls. And those walls will keep you back. Those walls will keep you back. If you're white and you only deal with white friends, you have a problem. If you're black and you only deal with black friends, you have a problem. If you're Indian, you deal with mostly Indian friends, you have a problem. You have to expand your cultural circle, and then you have to reach out to people, right? How many of you have LinkedIn accounts? All right, very good. How many of you actively pursue knowledge through them and pursue friends that can help you? Okay, you have to, okay? And you don't have to be pushy, okay? But if any of you reached out to me on my LinkedIn, do you think I would say yes? Of course I would say yes, right? Especially if it's not anonymous. Say, hey, just listen to you talk at the UNT. Would love to get connected. Boom, let's get connected. And then what happens? The next layer comes in, the next layer comes in, the next layer comes in. I found Dean Kinshuk on LinkedIn. And because I was looking at the CIO here, right? And so then I went to the next level and said, okay, let me talk to the dean. And then he reached out to me, we established a connection, boom, here we are, right? These are the opportunities that will come your way, right? Don't isolate yourself.
And Andre, we have a couple questions from the Zoom. We only have about 4 minutes left, and
Okay.
we have to get out of here because there's a
Speed-
class at 1.
Speed answer.
These are kind of connected. The first one says, you mentioned avoid getting too comfortable. Embracing discomfort is often a key factor for personal and professional growth. What strategy do you use to avoid getting too comfortable and making yourself go to new heights? And what do you do to urge your risk-averse employees to do the same?
Okay, so one, it's the constant pursuit of knowledge. Okay, constant pursuit of knowledge. Because, I can't be afraid of something that I don't know to keep me from learning it, right? So at first, you'll start learning about a new discipline. It's kind of hard. The terms don't make any sense to you. And you could be watching Netflix instead. Boom, get it done. Two, I always take a job in which there's something I never knew before. You know the reason why, one of the main reasons why I took the job in Tarrant County? Because they're running SAP. I've never had an SAP installation in my life. So I figured I'm going to go dive head in. It's one of the most challenging systems. I'm going to dive right in. We'll see. What's the worst that can happen, right? And what was the second part of that, please? Your place. Listen. Responsibility flows upwards. If something goes wrong in your shop, you can have all kinds of excuses. But unless you say it's my fault and I take responsibility for it, your employees will never feel that they can take risks. And praise always flows downwards. All the successes are because of what they've done. All of the faults are because of something you failed to foresee. Now you think, oh my God, but then they might fire me. It's okay. It's okay. All right? If a big crisis ensues because you're the CIO of an organization and something went completely blotzo, and you say, no, it's my fault, it's my watch, and they fire you, it's okay. You're going to find another job. But the moment that something bad happens and your CEO asks you, Andre, what happened here? And you say, oh, you know what? It was Ramesh's fault. He forgot to back up that database. It was Fatima's fault. It was John's fault. Not only do you lose credibility with all the employees, believe it or not, you also lose, that credibility with your boss. And inside, you do not feel good about it. You might think, who escaped that one? Take the fall. Take the fall. Take responsibility. Because when you get to the highest levels, just like you get to hire people, promote people, reward people, you also sometimes have to fire people. And a lot of times you have to take responsibility. And we get back to the responsibility thing, right? You can make all the excuses in the world.
Thank you so much, Andre. I'm
All
gonna
right.
be right there.
That's
Thank
it.
you all for coming to the Industry Insights.